My name's Greg Carter, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Connected Building Software at Acuity Brands. And what I'm going to talk to you about today, it's going to echo a lot of the themes that you've been hearing through the course of the day if you've been in here to listen to a number of the other presentations. But what I want to try to convince you of is that when you think about a connected building, you should, in this age of IoT, you should really be thinking of that as one of the core platforms for innovation and for digital transformation. And a connected building, you hear a lot of different kinds of terms that we use. I'm going to try to explain why we use the term connected building instead of smart building. I think all of it's important, but when I think about smart, it's applying technology to do something with data and improve a process. And we've had smart technologies going into buildings for decades and producing some great results. But what we're seeing now that's unique is massive connectivity. And you heard a little bit about that in the last panel. So many of you may have seen this quote before, but I think it's important to think about. I think it's really insightful. We spend upwards of 90% of our times indoors. This is, inside buildings is where the vast majority of products and services are created, and also where they're consumed. And so, if you think about as we begin to digitize, this is where all the data is going to be generated, and where once we apply analytics and get some insights out of that data, this is where those insights will be applied through applications to drive improvements, driving improvements in employee productivity, in profitability, in experience. The sky's the limit, and you've heard lots of examples of that today. But today, we have very little visibility and control over what's happening inside our buildings. And again, to the point I made earlier, there's been lots of technologies deployed in buildings, but traditionally this has been done in silos to attack a very specific problem. Building management systems is one good example, trying to attack the problem of inefficiency in the way our HVACs run and trying to drive down energy costs. Or lighting control systems to do the same thing for lighting systems. Or even more and more advanced safety and security systems. And you heard Pivot 3 talking a lot about that today. But what you also heard Pivot 3 talking about is the desire to start taking that platform of safety and security and video surveillance and using the data for something else. And frankly, we haven't seen a lot of progress within buildings of bringing these systems together and taking that data and solving a bigger problem. So I'd like to paint a different vision of the future for you, and I think I'm going to also try to convince you that the time is now when this is really starting to happen. And that's, in the age of technology, we tend to think of smaller as better. But what if the most powerful technology asset you have is your largest asset? The very building that you spend that 90% of your time in could be an extension of your IT infrastructure and be a platform that you use to change and improve your business. So, what do I mean by a connected building? In this age of IoT, you've been hearing about it all day. Sensors are coming down in price. They're proliferating everywhere. We're able to get information about all kinds of things that are happening in our space. But today, largely, those sensors are disconnected, right? They're either being used for a specific business process and they're used in a specific system, or they're completely cut off and you've got to go download data from those sensors, or you can connect to them with a mobile device. So in a connected building, the first thing that is an important characteristic is that we provide the infrastructure to connect all of those sensors so we can be streaming data in real time. The second thing is we need to know where all those things are. So we're putting sensors out, whether we're putting a sensor on a person or we're putting a sensor on a thing, or we get data being generated by all these devices. We need to know where they are and how they move through the space. And if we marry together the state information coming from the sensors and the location information, we really start to get a sense of what's happening inside our space. The next thing we got to do is to do something with that data. So we have to be connecting these buildings to the cloud. And again, it might be surprising for a lot of you to know that even with technology we've been deploying for the last 30 years to attack energy management and things like that, the vast majority of those systems are completely disconnected. They're locally controlled within the building. So even if you have some great sensors and maybe you're starting to know more and more about what's happening in the space, it's only the local operator of a specific system that's going to have that data. So connecting these systems to the cloud is the next really important characteristic of a connected building. And then it's what you do with the data. So it's applying analytics, it's having the right analytics tools, It's having the right applications that can take the insights that you get out of those analytics and driving that down into making an improvement in some process, right? So those are applications that can run on a laptop. They can be cloud-based. They can be running on the edge, and I think we're seeing more and more of that. You've heard some great gateway companies talk about deploying applications to the edge, and I think there's a huge future and a huge need for that. But anyway, it has to manifest itself in an application in one of these environments or on a mobile device in order to actually change a process and drive an improvement. So if you put all these things together, you get a connected building, and that really becomes a platform for transforming a business and organization that exists within those buildings. And the first step that you can use that connected building for is to improve the performance of the building itself, right? So this is going to the next level beyond what each of those individual siloed systems were doing and starting to bring all that data together in the cloud, getting greater insights, and improving the way our buildings operate. But we can go beyond that. We can also improve the experience of people that are spending time in those buildings. We can improve processes that are core to the business and ultimately improve the performance of the business itself. So why are we talking about it now? Why am I saying that the time is now to actually create these connected buildings when we've been hearing these slogans for many years? Smart connected buildings, smart connected communities. Why is it different now? There's two key trends that are driving the change and really creating the tipping point. The first is business trends, and the second is technology trends that are really driving the demand for doing this now and making it possible to do this now. And I think of it as a combination of the carrot and the stick. You should be really excited about the technology that's available to make these things happen and the opportunities to drive improvements in your business and your buildings. But at the same time, you should be scared as hell about missing the chance to do it and having somebody else come behind you, a competitor, and going past you. So it's opportunity and fear playing at the same time. So if we look at the business trends, this really comes down to competition, and it comes down to more sophisticated customer demands. So we've all thought, we've seen what happens with layers of abstraction, right? So if you go back 30 years and look at the way our technology was being developed, we eventually started creating these more and more sophisticated platforms on top of which you had to do just that next step to be able to create something powerful. And so that allowed two guys in a garage to be able to develop the next startup that can be worth $1 billion. But it's even more intense now, because now it's not just two guys in a garage in Santa Clara, it's two guys in a garage in Bangladesh or in Rio or in Russia. And they can bring those innovations into our global economy that's completely interconnected with the fast pace of communication, and we can see disruptions of an entrenched global competitor almost overnight. So we have to fear the speed of competition. We have to be staying one step ahead, and that means really changing our environment into a much more responsive environment that allows us to advance. The second thing is our customers are expecting a lot more out of us. So we've all gotten used to the idea of having online applications that control almost all aspects of our lives. And more over the last 10 years or so, we've gotten completely used to that sitting in our pocket on a mobile app. Right? We expect instant connectivity and instant access. And so as we go to work, we're expecting that out of our business partners more and more. And so it behooves us to think about how we create that responsive environment, how we create a connected building that really allows us to understand what's happening inside the building and make improvements to our processes. The good news is that we're also seeing the tipping point of technology reaching the stage with all those layers of abstraction across many different technology silos that are really making the connected building a reality. So I'll talk about a couple of trends that I think are important there. The first is sensors, right? So we've talked today about the proliferation of sensors, the fact that the costs are coming down, the fact that the battery lives are getting longer, and at the same time, the sensors are getting more and more powerful. So we're getting to that stage where sensors are almost becoming disposable, where you can really put sensors on everything. And I think over the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to get down to the point where you don't even think about it. We're going to see printable technologies. These sensors are going to be absolutely on everything. At the same time, the sensors don't have to communicate that far. And so that further lengthens their battery life because we see the proliferation of near field communication technologies. And as was said by one of the panelists earlier, we see that Bluetooth Low Energy is emerging as the winner. And I think it was a lucky break because it was put resident on all of our mobile devices. So as we started seeing the first set of sensor use cases, it was about people walking around through a space and connecting to sensors without having to go and physically connect and download data. So because of that proliferation of BLE within the mobile devices, the sensor manufacturers are standardizing on BLE as a communication technology. The next thing is we've seen building technologies becoming IP enabled. So all of the building systems, whether it's BMS or it's safety and security or it's lighting, are introducing gateways that we may still have traditional analog technologies at the far edge, but near to the edge, we've got gateways that are allowing us to bring that data together and bring it to the cloud. Right? So it's now possible to bring all these silos of data together. What also is happening because of those gateways is we now have edge compute capability, right? Because as Moore's law continues, while we are optimizing gateways for cost, we're ending up with additional compute capacity. And so we're now really able to start deploying applications at the edge. And then on the software side, we've seen the rise of microservices and containers, which allow us to build fully distributed applications where we do certain processes up in the cloud, and we do other processes at the fog layer or in the data center, and then we do other processes at the edge, which is closest to the data, where we can process that data and avoid having to send things that we don't need to send to the cloud, but also improve our responsiveness. So if you have an application running at the edge, we can be taking in data, making real-time decisions, communicating node to node, and taking action. And then the last thing is that I think is one of the major technology trends is what's happening as we think about the cloud. Right? So everything is getting cheaper and more powerful and more readily available. So whether that's the bandwidth that communicates from the building up to the cloud, getting cheaper and more powerful, or it's the cloud infrastructure itself with the infrastructure as a service and platform as a service cloud providers. Storage, compute has become cheaper and cheaper. It's easier and easier to manage. And then the platform services that are being deployed give us the ability to take advantage of things like big data analytics and data lakes and machine learning without having to invest in our own businesses to develop those capabilities. So it's a really powerful time to think about all of these things coming together into a connected building where we can develop applications that are specific to the business that's running within that building. So as we think about the value to an end customer, a building owner, a tenant in the building, a business that runs within a building, I'd like to call out a study that was done by JLL. Some of you may be familiar with it. This was done a couple of years ago. But they looked across all of their customer base in North America and found that on average, those customers spent about $3 a square foot on energy. They spent about $30 a square foot on the space itself, whether that was rent or that was depreciation of the asset. And then another 10x increase to $300 per square foot on the employees that were resident within that space. What they didn't talk about in that study, but what we've heard from our customers, is that there's another 10x increase in terms of the revenue expectations of what's being produced by that space. So if we think about applying a connected building and applying that connectivity and intelligence to attack these problems as we move up that scale, obviously the ROI gets better and better the more you can do. Now the history of this has been, especially when we were talking about traditional buildings where we were deploying individual systems like BMS and lighting control, we were attacking the energy management play. And we've made a lot of progress, and I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit on a system-by-system basis has been taken down, and we're seeing much more efficient systems coming out today. But there's a lot more we can do once we connect those buildings and we really bring that data up to the cloud. And you heard Will Coleman talk in the last panel discussion about what you can do when you apply big data analytics and you start to look at systems across your buildings. You look at the whole portfolio and you develop insights to be able to further crank down that energy cost. So there's still value that we can derive even in the energy space. But what gets exciting is when we start using the intelligence and that connected infrastructure to try to attack other problems. Using sensors that are in the space to understand when people are in different parts of your space and when they're not. So we can optimize the space management. And a couple of people have talked about the ability to create algorithms that allow you to do more efficient planning and configuration of your space so you don't have to buy or expand the rental of additional space. Same thing for assets that you're using within the building. Same thing for the productivity of the employees that are managing that building. So all of that together allows us to really drive better building performance, which has a huge ROI. And there's low-hanging fruit there, but you can get to greater and greater value as you tackle the tougher and tougher problems. But what gets even more exciting is when you go beyond the building performance and you start to look at the performance of the business that is running within that building. And now we start thinking about the productivity not just of the employees that are managing the building, but all of the employees. And that's really what gets you up into that $300 a square foot. So if you know where the employees are, you can do time and motion studies, you can make them more efficient, you can make them more comfortable, more productive. Now you start to really drive efficiencies for the business. And then you can go beyond that as you start to understand the processes that those employees are doing to produce what it is that gets produced in that building, and start to generate more revenue, right? So whether that's in a retail space, understanding where customers are moving and trying to improve the effectiveness of your store design to increase your basket size, or it could be in a manufacturing plant where you're improving the efficiency of the production system through preventative maintenance of your equipment. The more you can know about what's happening in your space, the more you can move all the way up to that $3,000 a square foot. So huge ROIs are available by tapping into the connected building. So what this lays out is you can think of as a capability maturity model, right? When you're thinking about the connected building. You start with the traditional building where you've certainly applied technologies, but it's been within silos. The first step is to move beyond that to a connected building where it has all the characteristics that I talked about earlier to make it a connected building, and you first start tackling those building performance challenges with the connected building. And then the last stage is where you leverage all that same infrastructure and you build applications that are tapping into that data to really drive an improvement in the business. And so I'm going to take a few slides to walk you through what that looks like, that last stage, depending on what vertical market we're talking about. So in the first case would be looking at retail, and this is an area where our company, Acuity Brands, has a lot of experience in creating connected buildings and driving improvements in retail productivity. And so there's a couple key places where this can have an effect. The first is on a customer journey, improving the customer experience for the retailer's customers. So you can imagine a situation where the consumer has an app on their phone for that retailer. They come in, they can do a product search, they can find where the product is located within the store efficiently, and they can get a Google Maps experience to be guided right to the product, right? And this is a paradigm that they're very used to in the outside of the store with driving directions and so on. Once they get to that product, and they see that they've got to the shelf, but now there's a whole bunch of brands, and they don't really know what's the best specific product for their uses. They can click a button on that app and have an associate identified who's nearby and have that associate routed to them. So all of this improves the efficiency of the shopper experience and therefore drives loyalty to the store. On the store operations side, there's a whole bunch of other use cases that we can think of. The first would be restocking, right? So at the end of the shift, you end up with a bunch of extra products up at the cash register, scan those things into your app, and have those laid out where they should be located in the store and an optimal route to do the restocking activity. So guided workflow. Or a similar situation where you're doing actually the reverse of that, where you're doing an order pick for a buy online, pick up in store business model, which is becoming more and more common with retailers. So give a shopping list to an associate in the store, give them the optimal route to go pick that order and make it available to the customer when they show up. And then we've got a whole group of things we can do around intelligence, market intelligence, where we can track where associates and where customers are moving through the store to understand the effectiveness of our store design, understand our staffing level optimizations, understand how we can improve the prioritization of restocking activities, or even the marketing display effectiveness. So lots of different parts of the business process can be attacked by leveraging sensor data, location data, and applying it to these business problems. Airports is another one. I wasn't in the earlier session, but I heard reference to wheelchairs, so I'm going to build on that for those of you who weren't here. When we think about airport operations, or we think about the revenue that's being generated, there's a couple of key factors that are regularly identified by our airport customers. The first one is security lines. If they're thinking about the revenue that's going to be generated by stores and by restaurants within the gate area, the biggest factor about how much revenue gets generated is how fast people get through the security line so they have more time to wait before their flights. And so by understanding how long your lines are, by looking at where people are congregating and looking at how fast people are moving through the lines, that data can be provided to TSA to better balance where they have their agents and keep those lines shorter. You can also create a better passenger experience by helping a passenger get from their car, from the parking area, all the way to their gate in the fastest possible route, which certainly improves their experience, but also gets them into the gate area to spend more money at the different shops and restaurants that are there. There's also another factor that really affects how fast we get planes loaded and unloaded for on-time takeoff, and that's wheelchair availability. So it's a big problem. We have thousands of wheelchairs in large airports and lots of wheelchair pushers. But trying to figure out with the changing flights and with flights getting redirected at different gates, it's really hard to coordinate their activities and make sure you get the wheelchairs where you need them so you can efficiently offload a flight and get a new flight loaded. So by putting asset tags on those wheelchairs, asset tags on the employee badges of the wheelchair pushers, and then tapping into the flight manifest data from the airline systems, you're able to actually drive efficiency and get those wheelchairs where they're needed. In healthcare, similar kinds of things, asset utilization. You heard one of the previous panelists talk about putting asset tags on mobile medical devices so you don't have to over-purchase. You just have to optimize your purchases or your staffing levels. In commercial office, this can be about mobile apps that help you to find an empty conference room and then be routed to where that conference room is located, especially if it's an office that you don't spend a lot of time in. We can use these technologies to be able to find another employee that you're looking for who's moving around in the space at the same time. And then we can even optimize things like our field services teams. So by looking at sensors on consumables like paper and copiers or soap dispensers or coffee in the coffee pots, and only sending your field services to the places that are needed to do those refill activities instead of just doing constant circles. So lots of ways we can leverage sensor data and location data to improve things in an office. I'm going to skip warehouses for right now, just in the interest of time. I want to talk just real quickly about what does it mean to have a connected building and how do you do it. And for this, I like to think about the human body analogy. If you think about the brain being the cloud, where a lot of the heavy processing is getting done, and then a circulatory system, and we can use for this analogy the circulatory system passing blood and oxygen is much like data to go back and forth between major organs and the cloud. And that in the connected building is the cloud and the service provider networks bringing the data into the building, and then our IP enterprise networks that pass that data to the major organs, which in a building are things like computers and laptops and video systems. Now, we've been doing this for years, for decades, right? We're really good at that part of it. But in the world of IoT and digitization, remember we talked about it's sensors that are deployed everywhere, and this is more like the skin cells in the human body. And so the human body does not use the veins and the arteries to get to the skin cells. We have an optimized system called the capillary system, which gets to all of those endpoints. We need something similar in a connected building to be able to get the data to and from all of these different endpoints. And I will suggest that I think if we look to the existing building systems, we have one that's already optimized for the task, and that's our lighting networks. And that's for three key reasons. One is if you look up, you'll see that the lights are everywhere. They're everywhere where people are, where data is being generated, and they're within 10 to 20 feet. So if you imagine putting some technology in those lights, like a Bluetooth radio, you now have an onboarding network to get that last mile to where all of these distributed sensors are going to exist. You also have a grid formation pattern of beacons that can be used to triangulate indoor location of mobile devices, of asset tags. Second thing is it's the right connection. So all of these lights, as we've transitioned to LED, are now digital devices, and with lighting control coming into play, they are digitally connected. So we have a natural network that works like that capillary system that becomes a sensory network. The last thing to think about is that this is the right time to do it, because with the conversion to LED, which is only about 10% of the way through in North America, there's such a payback on energy savings from the LED and from the lighting control that the additional technology you put in those lights to create a sensory network is completely paid back in a short period of time, a couple of years. So just to talk really quickly about Acuity Brands, we are a lighting company. We came to this from Strength in Lighting. We're actually the largest lighting company in North America. But we have also expanded as we recognized that this was coming, and through acquisition and organic development, we've built a set of brands from core lighting to control, to networking, and now to software. And our mission is to turn buildings into strategic assets. We have a booth that's just outside the door here where we're showcasing 3 of our software brands. The idea is that sensory network, which is built by the physical infrastructure of these connected lights, is brought to life through these kinds of software. We have DG Logic, which is really our data plane, our management of IoT data securely from node to node and node to cloud, as well as an application enablement platform that allows you to rapidly build applications based on streaming data. And then we use that core platform within our other 2 software businesses. Lucid, as you heard, if you were here for Will Coleman's presentation, Lucid is a cloud analytics platform and an edge-based platform that's all about building data and optimizing building performance from all of these different sources. And you can do things like fault detection, you can drive improvements in energy, you can drive improvements in asset utilization. And then Atrius, which is aimed at the businesses that are operating inside of those buildings. And so that's really where we get into indoor location services, personal navigation on apps, geospatial analytics, asset tracking, et cetera. We work with a bunch of software partners. While we do help our end customers to build applications from these services, we also have lots of partners out there that are doing that for customers. And even though you probably haven't heard of Acuity Brands, I wanted to make it clear that, again, the time is now. We have been doing it at scale for many years. For the Atrius services, we have over 250 million square feet covered by these kinds of intelligent lighting systems that are turning them into connected buildings. Lucid is covering and optimizing over 85,000 connected buildings, and DG Logic has over 25,000 applications deployed in production today. So this is real. This is really happening, and I encourage you to learn a lot more about it and figure out how you can be a part of making your buildings connected.